Are you going to do this vlog? Is this your video? I think Lucy's decided she's doing this video. Are you? Have you got all the info? Hello! And welcome to another bookish video from me, Johanna, Meet My Dog and Books. So today I'm going to be sharing some of my favourite audiobook recommendations. So grab a cuppa and let's get stuck in. Smile! So I'm going to be covering pretty much most genres in this recommendations video so that everyone can maybe find something that they maybe like to check out on audio. I initially started reading audiobooks many years ago, and what I only ever used to read on audio. I just realised I've still got my ambience on, and the Tweety birds were the on ambience. You probably don't want that going through the entire video, although it is an audio experience. But yeah, I started reading audiobooks maybe about 10 years ago or something. I think I was first introduced to them via Don't Hate On Me, Audible. And so that was my first taster into audiobooks. And I used to predominantly only listen to non-fiction because I really struggled to stay focused with sort of any other, not like with fiction books. And it was only from reading a lot of non-fiction that one day I thought, well, maybe I'll try a fiction book. I can't even remember what it was I tried. And I loved it. And I think the main thing that makes it for me is the narrator, the story. And sometimes some audiobooks will have like a full cast production, which is amazing. And some of the recommendations in here do have that. And I think I found a way, because I've got dogs and I walk them at least 3 times a day, there's certain activities that I'm doing that make listening to audiobooks really easy. So I can't listen to audiobooks if I'm doing something like if I'm doing a cross stitch that I know is pretty easy, I can listen to an audiobook. If I'm walking the dogs, if I'm going for a run, if I'm doing chores, if I'm cooking a recipe I already know. But if I have to do something that also requires my brain, like reading a recipe or like work, I can't listen to audiobooks and work because I need to use my brain for it, and then straight away I'm kind of disassociating from what's in my ears. Doing jigsaws, but dog walking was my main, like when well, that would make sense because Lucy's 13, so it was when I was getting into dog walking I was like, oh, I kind of want to listen to something. Since then I have I don't really use Audible as much. I use a whole range of different audiobook platforms. That includes Libby and Audiobooks from my libraries that I'm members of. I would say Libby always seems to have a much better user experience but also selection, but it kind of depends on your library. I use BookBeat, which a few of my Instagram friends use, and also Michaela uses BookBeat as well, and actually she's currently got a kind of discount affiliate link that you can check, so I'll hit her because she's done a audiobook video not that long ago, so I'll link that book and I'll link that video in the description, so if you want to check out her BookBeat, because it was a similar offer, which I think it was like 90 days for free. So they all have loads of pretty much newish books in there and a whole range of genres, so you could check that out. Or I use Everand, which used to be Scribd, which used to be really good. I hear they're going to be going down the lines of Audible, where you actually have to pay just for 1 credit and use a credit, whereas with BookBeat it's like you can buy a plan based on a number of hours. So I think I'm on 50 hours. You can get 20 or you can buy more. Audible is like you buy 1 credit and that gets you 1 book. And so I kind of use a mix. I also think there's quite a lot of audiobooks on YouTube are kind of now copyright free that you can access as well. So loads of different platforms for lots of different needs. People use Spotify as well, but I don't use Spotify personally, but I think I've heard good things. So I can't give you a personal recommendation on that one. But yes, and also the age-old question, does audiobooks count as reading? It's almost like a rhetorical question. Of course it does. To imply otherwise, be a little bit ableist in that some people aren't able to consume books in any other way. I'm very privileged in that I can consume books in audio, ebook and physical book. Some people have disabilities that mean that they can't use any other means of reading books. In actual fact, I think I've heard that, I think there's been research where that if you listen to an audiobook, and actually sometimes audiobooks take me longer to read, if you listen to an audiobook, you're most instances less likely to skim, but also you're hearing every single word, whereas a lot of the time when you're physically reading, your brain is filling in. You know how sometimes when you're reading sentences and your brain starts to fill in like words, you know, the kind of connector words. So there's that, but also you can have a whole different experience listening to audiobooks. It would just be like having, I don't have anyone in my life that is willing to sit down and read a book to me. So audiobooks are the way forward. And also, like, there are some amazing narrators out there, like amazing storytellers that can just really bring a book to life. That's not to say that, so it all brings different experiences. So I'm not really going to get involved in that chat about it not counting as reading, because it does. End of. Anyway, I've been chatting for a bit too long now, haven't I? Let's get on to the recommendations that are in no particular order, but just the order I remembered them in on my notepad. The first one I'm going to recommend is non-fiction. It's called The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11. So as you can imagine, this is a very tough read. So this book tells the story of the day as it was lived by those who lived through it. The audiobook has like I don't like to say cast, but it pretty much is a 45-person cast in the storytelling. So there's loads of people from different backgrounds talking through their different experiences, their oral history of the event. So as you can imagine, it's utterly powerful, insightful, heartbreaking. But this is one of the best audiobooks I've ever read, but it is a really tough read. I would say if you've got an interest in understanding the human side of 9/11, absolutely check this out. The way it's been handled and dealt with by the author was phenomenal. As well as being filled with eyewitness accounts, it's also really extensively researched. And when I look back at my Goodreads review, it pretty much just said one word: wow. The next is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this follows the story of a kind of, well, they semi-retired? So a young tennis player, young in like outside competitive athletic life. She's retired and she decides to make a comeback. So basically when she retires, she was the best tennis player that has ever lived. And she sacrificed a lot to get there, but we follow on, 6 years after her retirement, and she's watching the US Open. It's in her records that she's made in tennis, about to be taken by another British player. So she decided to make a comeback at 37 or something, which apparently is old in the tennis world. One last time reclaim her record, despite the fact that made her like she's a total battle axe, we didn't like her anyway. And so it's a mix of that, like, as well as her relationship with her dad and her coach from when she was much, much younger. Javier, I think his name is. Now, as someone that's not a mega tennis fan, I was like, oh, I got it, like, I've picked this up secondhand after reading it initially in audio, and I was blown away with the audio production. It felt like, so see when you were hearing things like, that the narration was amazing, but when you were hearing, there was lots of sound effects and a full cast, and so when you were hearing things like her media interviews and all of that that were following up as part of the story, it felt like you're listening to a full production. It was so cleverly done. The story itself is amazing. It is one of my many favourite Taylor Jenkins Reid books, and also I would say perfect for summer, because you know you get tennis, sort of US Open, Wimbledon and all that kind of vibes. But if you don't like tennis, that is not a problem with this book, because I don't hate tennis, but I'm not that fussed about it, and I absolutely adore this. So the next one I highly recommend in audio is Listen for the Lie. So this story is psychological mystery thriller. We follow main character Lucy, who 5 years ago is found wandering along the streets in her local neighbourhood, covered in her best friend's blood, with zero memory of what the heck happened. So this is quite a good story that delves into the complexity of memory, trauma and truth. She was never charged with anything because there was no evidence to charge her, but the local community still have their eyes of suspicion on her. And Lucy has to go back home when a true crime podcaster decides to reopen the case and start investigating. So she heads home to face the truth. Excuse the gurgling noises in the background, it's my washing machine. They are not part of the audiobook experience. So there's two narrators in this book, January and Will. I think Will does the true crime podcaster, and they do an absolute stellar performance. The audiobook is really good at integrating the true crime podcast element. It even has like sound effects for intros and outros when it's letting you listen or read the podcast episode that the other character is recording as part of the story. Plus the plot is just totally twisty and engaging, so I literally consumed this in about 72 hours. The next is another mystery thriller that also has a bit of a podcast, more of a kind of social media element. It's called What Happened to Nina, and I read this in audio this year. Did I? Or was it the end of last year? Like relatively recently. Follow a college student called Nina who disappears after a weekend trip with her boyfriend. He comes back alone, and his explanation for her disappearance is a bit suspect. And then the story follows the families on either side. One who is desperately seeking justice, and the other family who are desperately seeking to protect their son. So this spirals into an absolute media frenzy that explores privilege, the impact of public opinion, and the lengths people go to protect their family. It's got an ensemble of narrators. The narrators for all of these I'll put in the descriptions below. So in this ensemble cast just brings together, just like showcases the depth of each of the characters, which I thought was brilliantly done. And so because of that, it becomes like a really immersive, multi-perspective storytelling experience. And the plot was top notch, so I was utterly engrossed. Again, this one, I think I might have read this one in 48 hours because I was just like, this is so gripping. And then we moved to sort of mystery thriller to cozy whimsical fantasy in The House in the Cerulean Sea. I read this ages ago, and I think I've read it twice. I've read it in paperback, and I read it on audio the second time because I picked it a good while ago, a couple of years ago, for my book group read. So Linus is a solo care worker who works in a department in charge of magical youth, and he gets sent to an orphanage to evaluate, which like houses 6 kids, and he's there to evaluate their extraordinariness but also their potential danger as magical kids. So as you can see, pretty much it's pretty fantastical. But as he immerses himself in this orphanage and spending time with the kids, he embarks in a transformative journey. By the way, all these characters are like uber delightful, and it's a journey about like found family, acceptance and love, right? So this book is just cozy fantasy vibes. The narrator of this is Daniel Henning, and he delivers a standout performance in his narration of this story. Even is able to create really distinct voices for each of the characters, which just bring them to life in your ears. And what I loved about this is the audio experience. I felt, for me, sort of amplified the whimsical, heartwarming nature of this whole story. I just utterly loved it. And actually, I think I might need to give it a reread. So from whimsical fantasy to some non-fiction. This is, I think this is one of the, I think I read this when it first came out. It's Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. And it's Trevor Noah's memoir about Trevor Noah growing up in apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa as a mixed heritage boy who has a black mother and a white father, which at the time was legally a crime. The thing I love about this and quite a lot of memoirs is that it's narrated by the author. So it's narrated by Trevor Noah, so it feels like even more of a personal story when they're talking to you, when they're literally reading you their story. So it feels even more authentic and deeply personal. Plus, as he tells different stories, and especially when he's telling the story of his mother, he is a great mimic at doing very distinct voices, and it actually at times made me laugh out loud. And because of that, he's able to really blend humour and the heartfelt story of his life. I highly, highly recommend it. And that's with me knowing very little about Trevor Noah other than he's a US talk show host, but bar that, that's all I knew. So again, with many sort of memoirs, this one is one that you don't really need to know much about Trevor, because he tells you all about it in this really good, heartwarming and tough read. Then of course I can't not give you some horror, as a fan of horror, so there's these two and then the next one. Of course it's Stephen King, and we have Pet Sematary and It. So Pet Sematary is probably like about an average size book, and It is an absolute chunk of a book, as with other ones like The Stand and stuff. Many of his weighty books I absolutely recommend reading an audio, because sometimes it feels like less intimidating if you're just consuming it on audio rather than physical form, is my personal opinion. So for those of you who don't know, Pet Sematary follows, after a tragic incident, it follows a grieving father who discovers that near their house there's an ancient burial ground for which it has powers of bringing people back from the dead, but at a horrific cost. And I think what the narrator does really well in this particular story is encapsulating the absolute slow burning dread of the story as it unfolds. And also, like, the chilling moments in this story are so hard to hear in your ears, like in a creepy good way, because I love horror. And if you don't know the story of It, we follow a group of childhood friends who reunite as adults to combat an ancient evil that preys on the kids of their local town, Derry in Maine. And also, you know, one of the main characters in this that isn't one of the kids is Pennywise the clown. And in this narration, the narrator does one of the most epic jobs of the creepiest Pennywise voice. It's terrifying. I also think they do a really good job of that shift between the childhood and adulthood voices through the storytelling. As I said, it is a chunk, but I found it a really accessible way to consume that story, which I adore. The next horror is a horror comedy by Grady Hendrix. I've got it here. Oh, it's behind there somewhere, so I can't bother getting out, so I'll put a screen grab. It's Horror Store. Horror Store is set in a haunted IKEA-like store called Orsk. So you can imagine, and the whole style of the book inside is like an IKEA catalogue. It's really well executed. And in this story you follow the overnight sort of night shift staff who are exposed to creepy hauntings within the store during the night. What we say about this on audio is it, in my opinion, it had really good immersive sounds. There was loads of sound effects as well as when it was telling you the plot of the story. So it's got a really good design sound design and creepy narration. If you can hear some steps and noises, it's the witch in the background creeping about as I'm talking about creepy audiobooks. There's some really good strong voice acting that does that really good blending of humour and horror, which is the classic MO of Grady Hendrix and what I love about some of these books. Plus the narrator, who I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the description. They have a really good quirky tone, which not only helps with the humour but really builds the tension in the story. So if you are privileged enough to have a physical copy of the book and an audiobook, I also recommend doing that combo because of the execution of how the book looks itself, because it does feel like an into, honestly, chef's kisses. And then from horror to cosy mystery, I've got 2 cosy mysteries to tell you about. The first one is Finlay Donovan is Killing It by El Cosimano, and I read this years ago. I've actually got, oh, where is she? Got it here. Right. It's also been tabbed. I've listened to it and physically read it. And it's a witty, cosy mystery where we follow a struggling single mum called Finlay, who is also a writer. And she gets mistaken for a contract killer because someone overhears her talking about like the plot of a current or book she's writing. Chaos ensues. This is narrated by Angela Davies. I'll confirm in the description. Her narration is outstanding. She brings the story and the character of Finlay to life really well through like strong characterization in both tension and humour. I could absolutely like visualise Finlay as a character through her narration. She also creates really distinct and believable voices because there's quite a few characters in this book. One is Finlay's sidekick. What's Finlay's sidekick called? Eve? It's like her pal, and I can't remember her name. Edit and me will put it in. But she brings each of these characters to life for a really good, distinct narration and giving them distinct voices. And overall, the pacing and the witty tone is top notch. Also, if you do like this, there are 1, 2, I think there 3, possibly 4. I think there's the 4th one that I've still not read yet. I've read 3 of them. And I blooming love Finlay Donovan, so I do. Then there's one which I've mentioned in recent, maybe two recent videos because I was reading book 2 in this Cozy Mystery series and this is book 1. It is Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers by Jessie Sutanto. This is a witty, cosy mystery that follows a sharp, tea-loving widow called Vera, who discovers a dead body in her tea shop and takes it upon herself to decide to investigate this crime. And along the way, she makes unlikely friendships with the prime suspects. So that's the overall premise. This is narrated by Eunice Wong, who does a great job of bringing Vera to life and everything that I love about Vera as a main character. She also does a really great job of bringing the whole diverse cast of characters to life through her narration. And her narration is filled with warmth and humour, and it makes it just like filled with, like, just makes it so immersive and full of charm. Like, I read book 2 in paper and I think I'd really love to read it again on audio, because especially if Eunice Wong reads it, because I really loved it on book 1. Then back to non-fiction. This is a memoir by Jenny Lawson. It's called Furiously Happy. This is a hilarious, heartfelt memoir about Jenny's struggles with mental illness, but she does it through pure humour and absurdity and how she utterly embraces weirdness. So I've read this both on audio and I got the book out the library, and I would say if you can, definitely read it on audio, because Jenny reads it herself and she's awkward and she's wild and she's emotional, and she has amazing comedic timing, which makes her storytelling like just, in the one hand hilarious, and in the other hand quite emotive, like quite emotive to the point where like it's a bit heartbreaking. Plus her humour is really dry and sarcastic, which is the kind of humour I love. And in the audiobook, she often ad-libs bits, both a mixture of little asides and reactions, which isn't in the printed version. So honestly, if you want to have, and it feels weird saying this, let's see, just get bored of my chat. It feels weird saying this about a book about someone talking about their struggles with mental health, but Jenny Lawson makes you laugh out loud a lot. So I highly, highly recommend. Then, from a memoir to historical fiction, one that I mentioned in my weekend reading vlog that's just passed, I'll link the description below. And I had finished The Women by Kristen Hanna. Kristen Hanna is an auto-buy author for me, so even though I've got loads in her back catalogue still to catch up on, I will always buy her latest book. This one I really enjoyed. It is still not my favourite above The Great Alone and Four Winds so far, but it follows the story of a young nurse during the Vietnam War who returns home to face heartbreak, trauma, and a fight to reclaim her voice in a world that almost refuses to accept people like her, that women were even in the Vietnam War. So as you can imagine, a very poignant story. This is narrated by Julia Whelan, who does an amazing immersive job of telling this story from the main character Frankie's point of view. She manages to like naturally capture the mix of Frankie's strength and vulnerability, and has just like a really, really immersive storytelling. And I think, has she, Edit Me will know, I don't know, I recognise her voice. I don't know if she narrates any other of Kristen Hanna's books, but she had an amazing job of narrating really complex female characters, like amazing job. It is a big book, so I would say, and I find sometimes reading big books on audio make them seem far less intimidating. Same as on ebook as well, because you kind of don't really know how chunky it is. And last but not least is another non-fiction story called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking. I forgot I actually have my own original copy of this. Whew, it's a bit dusty. Even though this is quite different to the colourful books that I normally read, I love this cover. So this book explores how introverts are undervalued in a society that favours extrovertism. That's not to say one is better than the other. They're just both very different. And one is very much more undervalued in society than the other. It also celebrates the unique strength, creativity, and power that introverts can bring. Says me as a self-proclaimed introvert. As you would expect, the narration of this book on audio is both calm and thoughtful, just like us introverts. So it does feel like more like a personal conversation someone is having with you. It's also really easy to absorb in small chunks. I mean, the way it's broken up anyway is a book, that it talks about part one, the extrovert deal, part two, your biology, yourself, and then even that's broken up. But it does, because it's a nice mix of storytelling, research, and real life experiences, it kind of flows really naturally on audio, and it feels like less of a weighty non-fiction to read. So it's the kind of thing where you can you can dip in and out of it really easily, which I found. And actually now it's been years since I've read this, so I think I might have to give it a good reread, just to remind myself how awesome us introverts are. Anyway, so that there is a whole bunch across different genres of audiobooks that I highly recommend. So do let me know in the comments, have you listened to any audiobooks recently that you really, really enjoyed and want to recommend to me and others in the comments? Is there any here that have piqued your interest and you fancy checking out? Are there any people that have never tried an audiobook and would like some tips and tricks or where to start? Just let me know what genres you like and I can give you possibly at least one, if not two, audiobook recommendations. And if you like this, I have so many more audiobook recommendations to share, so let me know, because I could always do another one in the future, because a large chunk of what I read on a monthly basis are audiobooks as well as and physical books. So always happy to share them. And yeah, a narrator can make or break a book, so this is why I always think it's really helpful to share some amazing audiobook recommendations. So if you like this video, please don't forget to give me a like, a comment, and or subscribe, because it all makes a difference. And if you don't know what to say but would like to know that you've been listening and watching, leave me a headphones emoji, or just write headphones, and I'll catch you all up in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you in another bookish video very, very soon. Cheerio!